ultimately, if Washington wants to make a deal, I think that Europeans will have to kind of grin and bear it.
As we've been discussing, Donald Trump will be meeting with President Putin in Alaska on Friday for this all-important summit. President Zelensky has hailed Trump's determination to end the war, but warned that the Russian army was not preparing to stop fighting. This comes slightly differently as Vice President J.D. Vance continues to be on these shores with his trip to the Cotswolds, despite locals being less than welcoming about it. Anti-Vance protesters are reportedly gearing up to stage a Vance Not Welcome party in the local area. Let's now hear from the Times' Washington editor Katie Bors and Sohrab Ahmari, US Editor of UnHerd. Sohrab, let's begin with you. As someone who's regularly been in touch with J.D. Vance, why has the administration decided that land swapping has to be on the table?
It's a very simple fact, and that is that this is an industrial war. It's a form of industrial war we haven't seen since World War II, really, in Europe. And what industrial war means is that a larger nation with a bigger population and with the much greater industrial capacity to build shells, like old-fashioned World War II style shells, will win over a small. There is just no chance in which Ukraine can reclaim all the territories it's lost. So it just is a very basic reality that this administration understands, and lots of serious analysts understood much earlier in the conflict, that Ukraine cannot militarily overcome a Russia that, as Trump quoted Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, a Russia that is a massive country and making war is just what they do. So with that in mind, of course, a negotiated settlement must involve a kind of what some people call a chopped Ukraine.
Now, Katie, can you give us the view from how the White House is viewing this summit? It all has been thrown together rather quickly, as we were just hearing from Lord Darroch, and this idea of land swaps is something the president has been talking about. What do you think's going to come out of it? Is it going to be a ceasefire? Is it going to be a land swap deal? Or might it not actually be that much? Could it all just be optics at this stage?
Well, I think you set a nice range of options there, Seb, and covered yourself well. I think that the US president wants to keep both the press pack, some of his own colleagues, and Vladimir Putin, and probably Zelensky too, guessing. And we saw that a bit. I was in the White House briefing room for this press conference on Monday, which was officially about DC and his plans to take back the city. But of course, a good portion, because there were journalist questions, was spent talking about Ukraine. And here Donald Trump would say, on the one hand, he's going to know within 2 minutes of meeting Putin how the meeting's going to go. He was saying he could agree to some type of peace deal, and then he would, out of respect, call Zelensky first, but not really have Zelensky there. And then he also suggested, but there is, of course, a chance, I say, good luck, guys, keep on fighting, and I walk back. So there's a whole multitude of options. And there's also semantics, which is, how do you talk about these things? You can talk about a land swap. You can also talk about a frozen conflict whereby you're not necessarily saying the land has changed permanently, but you're not changing it from where the conflict is there. So I think there's a lot of grey in terms of how far and how bold what could be talked about could be agreed. Certainly, I think there's anxiety. We know that from the fact that you're getting this call with Keir Starmer, European leaders, Ukrainians, that if Trump and Putin are left to do this, then it could be more in favour of Russia than Ukraine. But generally speaking, I think that Donald Trump is happy to now have this in-person meeting. Obviously, the last time they had an in-person meeting was the first term, and a sense that more is going to be done through a face-to-face meeting than is going to be done through the cycle that we've been in of Steve Witkoff going to Moscow semi-regularly.
Now, Sohrab, let's look at the role of Europe in all this, because we're somewhat on the sidelines of this whole issue that obviously President Zelensky may or may not be in Alaska. But as Katie said, there's kind of some shuttlecock diplomacy going on for Europe to try and influence this. When it comes to the president and the vice president, what role do you think they see for Europe as we potentially come to a ceasefire and some kind of settlement?
There's a dual dynamic going on. The first is that the dominance of Washington over Europe, London and Brussels, has reached a kind of zenith right now. I mean, the United States just wields so much power in terms of it being able to impose its will trade-wise, kind of determining the course of determining the course of European diplomacy, that, ultimately, if Washington wants to make a deal, I think that Europeans will have to kind of grin and bear it, even if they don't like the idea. That's over Ukraine. But in a larger sense, this contradicts my first point in some ways, but in the mind of the administration, there's a synthesis here, which is, ultimately their view is the United States, and this is something Vance has told me many times, and lots of other people in the kind of Trump 2 security apparatus believe, that the long-term strategic opportunity and challenge for Washington is in the Pacific region. Our main rival is China. Already in a few years, we'll reach a situation in which half of global GDP will be centered in Asia. And so the United States must compete there. And in a world of scarce resources, we can't have multiple theaters going on, Iran, Ukraine, this, that. There's only so much the United States can do. Those resources have to be diverted long-term to Asia. Again, this is something that JD has told me repeatedly in various forums on and off the record. So that being the case, what the expectation is that in terms of a kind of more broad defense against a potentially territorially voracious Kremlin, it's up to Europeans to stand up for their own defense, to build up their capacities, interoperability, greater spending as a share of GDP, all the stuff that the U.S. has been urging the Europeans to do for a long time. Yeah. And I should say that specifically David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary, is seen as someone who gets this. In other words, he understands acutely that the U.S. needs to pivot to Asia, and that means Europe has to step up, and that Britain has a role in leading the rest of Europe to step up in its own defense.
And finally, Katie, I just want to bring you in here because obviously one person who feels a bit warmer towards Europe is JD Vance, who's currently in the UK and living his best Cotswold life. And I believe you've described in one of your excellent columns for the Sunday Times is that MAGA, the Make America Great Again movement, is living its best hot MAGA summer. I just wanted to get your view on why JD Vance is here. Why is he holidaying here when there's obviously this slight antipathy towards Europe and to parts of the UK when the Vice President talks about free speech, but seems to be having a very nice time fishing with David Lammy and enjoying the Dalesford Farm Shop?
Yeah, I had a Republican say to me it was a mega British summer because, of course, we had Trump in Scotland. Now we have JD Vance in Cotswold and beyond. And soon in September, though we can debate the definition of summer, we'll get Donald Trump back for the second state visit. I think when it comes to this interest in the UK, speak to those who are close to JD Vance and they will say, oh, all you Brits think that, oh, he hates Britain because he's very critical of things like freedom of speech. You think back to that Munich speech. But actually, it comes from a place of care. And I think you can argue that when you look at this administration, they take a closer interest in the UK and to a degree wider Europe, but I think very much the UK than probably the White House over the past few decades or the decade or so. And I think that I spoke to a few of J.D. Vance's friends saying, what is it? Is it the philosophical, Greece to Rome that we heard of, India's gone by, and they said it's perhaps not as thought through as that. It's more just a natural sense that we're a country where things are in common, but also a slight feeling that if things are going wrong in the UK, given the shared cultures, there won't be that now until it starts to be a problem in the US.
Thank you very much. That was Katie Bors, the Washington editor of The Times, and Sohrab Ahmari, US editor of UnHerd.